Hello and welcome back. In the previous video, which was part one of Node Package Manager, we talked about what is NPM. We also discussed how to install a package and talked a little about the package.json file. In this video, what I want to do is pick up where we left off in the last video. We looked at an example where our code where we installed a third-party module called bycrypt, and bycrypt allows you to encrypt your password. It basically runs it through a hashing algorithm, and then you'll typically save that password in a database. In this video, I want to continue fleshing out the code for that, and then I want to install one more third-party module. And the module that I want to install is called nodemon. And the nodemon module is not a module that our application would depend upon, but it's a module that helps us in the development process. And so you'll see that in our package.json, it's going to save it to a different area, it's going to say like a kind of an area where it's a development dependency, not necessarily a dependency that our application depend upon. More to come on that later in the video here. But let's jump back to the PowerPoint slides here, and then we'll jump back to this example. I didn't review these slides in the previous video, but there's some more information on what is NPM, then some use cases or why you would use NPM. If you have virtual teams, this may be a good way to collaborate on a package or a shared repository. And this is different than Git. This is more of code you will use in your development environment, or others can download and install and begin to use right away. Where I would say using GitHub is more of just where you store your code that others can access. So there's, like I said, there's a few things here. Read through these here, but this is why you would use NPM. And then here's some of the commonly used commands. And so I'm really big on cheat sheets. And so NPM install, and there's a few others here that you can take a look at. So what I want to do here is get back to the example that we left off on, which is working with bycrypt. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this function generate salt, and we talked about what is salting. It adds a layer of randomness to our hashing algorithm to protect against rainbow attacks. But what we're going to do here is output the hash. So typically a user will create a username and a password. We'll take that password, and let's say that the user created a password and just gave a generic password such as password 01. And so what typically happens is the user will create a password, and we don't save this into our database. What we're going to do is we're going to save a hash. We're going to send this password 01 through a hashing algorithm, and it's going to generate a unique string that we can save into our database. And so if we want to see what this outputs here, we can just say console.log hash. Let's just say a few more words about this function here. We pass in the password the user sets, which is password 01. We pass in a salt, which gives a layer of a level of randomness to the hashing algorithm. And then we have our callback function. So once it has these two things, it's going to do its job of hashing out our password, and then we can output the hash value of what it encrypted. So that's what's going to output to the console. So let's save this, Control S, and let's run our program. So let's be node bycrypt.js, and then here's our hashed password that'll get saved into the database. Let me go back to NPM, and I want to show you, like, okay, so once this is saved into the database, what about if a user comes back to your website? They're going to put this password back in, but how do we compare this password and this hash to determine if they're a user in our database? And so let's add some code to determine that. All right, so let's jump back to the bycrypt website, And like I said, we're going to use some of the sample code that they provide. So here, to check a password. So like I said, if a user comes back to the website, they're going to enter in password 01. But then how do we compare that with the hash value that was encrypted? So we'll copy this and let's jump back to our editor. And we'll just paste that below here. So here, we're going to, this compare function that comes from the bycrypt module takes 3 different arguments. The first one is going to be the password that the user will sign into your website with, and then the hash value. In this case, the hash value is this thing here that was generated when they created their account. And then we're going to just basically paste that in here. And put some quotations around it. And then we have our callback function, which is going to determine if the password actually matches what it was what it encrypted. If it doesn't, then it's going to return false. If it does, it's going to return true. So here we'll just do a console.log of the result. And so it's going to compare my plain text password, which is password 01, against what it hashed, which is this value. And so it should return true. And then what we're going to do is we're going to test something else like not bacon to see if it returns false. Now, let's save this, Control S, and then let's run our program. There we go. It returns true. Now, you may be saying, like, why did it print true before it actually printed the hash value of our password? Reason being is because it's asynchronous. It runs JavaScript is extremely fast. This is kind of what we talked about in the previous videos. So while this thing was actually hashing out the password, JavaScript is non-blocking, so it doesn't wait. So it went on to the function and step 13 or line 13 and ran this function and returned the value of true before it actually came out with the hash value. And so that's one of the things about JavaScript is that, like I said, it's extremely fast. It's not going to wait to hash. It's going to run the script and not wait. So it's a non-blocking model. Okay, now let's change the password to this one here, some other plain text password. This should get us false at this time. And again, this is simulating when a user comes to your website, they put in their password, and we want to check to see if it lines up with the hash value or it matches up with the hash value that they created when they originally created their account. So we save this and let's go ahead and run our script, and it should get false this time, right? So again, this is a small example of how you would create, how you would implement a third-party module. Somebody else created bycrypt and maintains this code base for us to use, and it's extremely helpful when implementing a level of security into our application in terms of authentication. But then bycrypt is saved as a dependency in our package.json file, and this is the version that is saved. Before we end this video, let me introduce one more module. Now, I'm going to install another module. This module is going to be called nodemon, and nodemon allows you to, instead of actually having to kill the server every time and restart the server, every time you press save when you're working on some code, it'll automatically hot reload the browser to reflect your changes. So let's go here and let's search for nodemon. So what I'm going to do is say nodemon. This is the one I want here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to install this module as a development dependency. And so I'll go copy that, and I'll go back to my development environment. I'm just going to bring up my terminal, Control tilde, and clear, and then let's go ahead and run and paste that in here, Control P. And you'll see that I put in save-dev. And you'll see that now my package.json file, I have on line 12, I have dependencies, and these are, bycrypt is going to be an actual dependency that my project uses because it's going to be necessary for allowing users to create a password or create an account and encrypt the password. And then dev dependencies, I'm not going to necessarily have this particular module travel with my application because it's more of just for development purposes here. All right, I had to pause the video there. I had a slight internet connection issue there. So let's jump back. So what I was going to do an example of is actually how do you use this nodemon dev dependency. I'm going to create a file, and I'm going to name this file, let's call it routing or server.js. And this is going to bring back some code that we previously worked through. So I'm just going to copy this from my previous program and paste it in. So this is here where we use some of these core modules to build out a routing system. And let me just bring in some pages here. And I'll paste these here. All right. So we have about, contact, and home. And again, when we're looking at package the nodemon package, it's really helpful when you're building a web page, and it's almost like live server. When you save, it'll automatically reload your web page, so you don't have to stop and kill the server and restart the server to see the changes reflected in the browser. So I have my server.js, and we're good to go there. So I'm going to save everything. And let's talk about how to configure nodemon. So I'll go to my package.json, and what I've done here is I've added this start key under my scripts key. And I'm configuring nodemon to start up every time I run a command called npm start. So here, if I say npm help, it'll show me all the various commands that I have at my disposal. And if you look, let me scroll up a little bit. You'll see that there's this command that says start. What that allows me to do is, instead of actually having to run this command of, let's say, server or node server.js, I can use some of the commands that NPM provide, and it would automatically start up my server for me on my behalf. I can say npm start, and whatever I've identified here as the value, it would allow me to start my server. So let's test this out. We've already installed nodemon as a dev dependency, and if we just run npm start, oops, let's not do bycrypt.js, let's do server.js. And I'm calling nodemon, and I'll save it. And I'll press enter for npm start. All right, so that starts up my server, and at this point here, I'm going to do a side by side. Let's do a control. Actually, let's go and bring up our browser, and let's say localhost. I think this one was 3000. All right, so here's our home page, and we can route, let's say about, right, that brings us to the about page. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a change to our server.js, or let's actually make a change to the home page here and say home, and then put some exclamation marks there. So let me bring up our web page again. Try to do a side-by-side view. All right, so if I save this file here, you'll see that nodemon is watching for any changes here. And actually, let's see here, it's only watching, not actually HTML, it's actually watching for any changes in my JavaScript. So this is not going to work when I save the HTML. But if I go back and save my, or change something in my Node.js, let's say that I just take off the semicolon and I save it, it's going to restart the server and to reflect those latest changes. Again, this is a quick example of how to use nodemon. Let's say, for instance, if I were to change this here to, instead of saying home, let's just read in the contact file. So now our home is going to generate what's in the contact. So I'll save that. Nodemon automatically refreshes or reloads the browser, or restarts the server. And so now if I go home, it should say information for contact. And I didn't have to stop the server myself and reload it. So nodemon is really just a helpful tool to help you in the development process to move a little bit faster. Instead of actually having to stop the server and reload it to see the latest changes, it'll automatically restart the server for you, and you can just continue your work with developing your site. So hopefully that makes sense. In the next video, we're going to talk more about, we're going to actually install another module called Express and begin to talk about routing using the Express framework, which is a lot easier than building out your own routing system using the core modules. So stay tuned for that video.